You're watching Force live streaming service.
And now, the latest around the wide world of tropics. Truck Weather Bulletin for August 20th. Well, here we are on the 232nd day of the year. We have 3 tropical storms and 1 remnant low active. We have Tropical Storm Linda there in the eastern Pacific, 2 tropical storms in the Atlantic, Grace and Henri, both on what appears to be a strengthening trend at this point. Grace, of course, re-emerging now in the Bay of Campeche. It's day 81 of Atlantic hurricane season, and Grace is going back into water, where it is expected to re-intensify into a hurricane again. Henri is expected to intensify into a hurricane again in general, where it does also pose a threat to the New England coast. So definitely something that both areas need to be watching for. It's day 97 of Atlantic hurricane season, and there is East Pacific hurricane season, and there is Linda there in the Pacific, and Grace is expected to cross over. Whether its remnant circulation survives or not, it remains to be seen. It has a 60% chance of reforming in the eastern Pacific. In the western Pacific, 16W is still there as a remnant, although it did get the Philippine name of Isang. It has a 70% chance of formation at this time. Unfortunately, ASCAI has not been doing a good job in defining whether this has a circulation again or not. In the North Indian Ocean, we're not looking at much going on here. It is, of course, August, and you typically don't see much going on here at all. That activity should be returning some point in the next month and a half or so, but for right now, it is looking really quiet over here. Here's the Atlantic satellite imagery. You can see the progress of Grace making landfall and then exiting back out into the Bay of Campeche there, and then Henri, which has been maintaining its intensity as it heads towards the west. However, it is expected to make that recurve soon enough towards the north again, and it is likely that it sees some intensification there. Linda has been on a drastic weakening trend today, as most of its convection just literally ejects itself from the center, with barely a naked circulation left of this thing, and it is likely that Linda finally becomes post-tropical by tomorrow. In the western Pacific, you can hardly see 16W there with all the cloud mass that's going on right now. It is located to the east of the Philippines, and it is expected to get itself a little bit more organized. The JTWC has this becoming a tropical storm again, so we will see if it gets the international name. The next one would be, of course, Omaze. Moving on over to the North Indian Ocean satellite imagery, that'll be coming up next. That is the same pattern that we're seeing with the last few weeks, monsoonal activity continuing across the North Indian Ocean. That is expected to continue, and of course the Arabian Sea remains relatively dry. Not really abnormal of what you would expect for this time of year. It's been what we've been seeing the last few weeks. And then of course the flutter imagery. Grace did not get that much disorganized over land, which is a little bit concerning given the fact that the Gulf of Mexico environment is pretty great, and Henri there is still chilling as it heads towards the west. It is not a threat to Florida, although it looks like it's going towards it. It is expected to turn soon. In the eastern Pacific, the sea surface temperatures look like this: 30 degrees Celsius temperatures across portions of the Mexican coastline. However, most of the eastern Pacific is around 27 to 28 at this point. And then, of course, as you go into the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, especially where Grace is going to be going into, 30 to 31 degrees Celsius. And then, of course, we have those 27 to 28 degrees Celsius temperatures for the main development region. Elsewhere, it's 28 to 29 for much of the Caribbean, as well as the western Gulf Stream area. In the North Indian Ocean, we're looking at those 28 to 30 degrees Celsius temperatures in the Bay of Bengal, and then, of course, those temperatures drastically drop off. By the time we get to the coast of Oman, it's only 22 degrees Celsius there. Relatively chilly there, and of course in the western Pacific we're looking at those 29 to 30 degrees Celsius temperatures for a majority of the basin. The Hainan Peninsula westward are seeing most of those temperatures above 30 degrees Celsius, as we have been seeing over the last few days. And then with the sea surface temperature anomalies, it looks like this. The ozone cell neutral conditions continuing. The subtropics of the Pacific and the Atlantic are looking relatively warm. Main development region looking warmer than normal, and of course the Gulf of Mexico is seeing more pronounced warmer than average temperatures at this time. So that is what we're looking at this time, and that switches us over to what we're going to be looking at today. Joining here tonight, we have, if Discord works, sorry about that. We have ourselves with us Amethyst, Christian, Elliot, Sam, Noah. Those are the people that are here with us. And how are you guys doing?
I'd say we're doing pretty well.
Good.
It's Mr. Bruh, but I'm good.
We're just gonna call you Noah for the sake of the stream. Anyways, getting that aside, we're starting off with, well, we were planning on starting with Grace, but it looks like we have the cone of Henri pulled up instead, and that has been a continuously evolving forecast to look at over the last few days here. It is now expected to turn some point during the night or tomorrow morning, and then of course it is expected to remain on that north-northeast turn before curving towards the north, potentially making a landfall across the Cape Cod or even further west, or it could just remain offshore. It all depends on the intensity that this does achieve, and then it will be slowing down significantly and then becoming post-tropical as it heads to the east-northeast. So definitely something to watch across portions of the New England coast as well as Atlantic Canada. The National Hurricane Center has highlighted the fact that they are likely to be issuing some kinds of watches overnight into tomorrow morning. So that is what we're seeing with that. Sam, can you pull up the Grace cone? There we go. This is the latest cone on Grace. It is back up to 60 miles an hour. However, we have it at 65 based on what was found from Recon. It is expected to re-intensify into a hurricane over the next 12 hours. 12 to 24, I should say, before it makes landfall some point during the night tomorrow night. It looks to be around 1 a.m. Saturday there, before it rapidly weakens and dissipates over the mountainous terrain of Mexico. However, its life does not end there. That remnants will cross into the eastern Pacific, where it does have a pretty good shot at reforming. Of course, there is two different scenarios of what we could be seeing with that. If it keeps its circulation and it doesn't dissipate and reform in the eastern Pacific, it would retain the name of Grace. If it loses its circulation, of course, it would get the next name of the eastern Pacific, which is currently Marty. Hearing some feedback issues in the background, hopefully that gets fixed. But we got tropical storm warnings across the northern end of the Yucatan right now, and of course the hurricane warnings for the area this is going to be landfalling in, a pretty sizable portion. And then, of course, tropical storm warnings as you head further into places like Tampico. So that is expected. What we're looking at here, based on what the cone is showing, it would project a landfall near Natlas in Mexico. And here are the key messages that we have with us with Grace there. Tropical storm conditions are going to be continuing this afternoon and evening across the northern Yucatan Peninsula. Those should subside later tonight. Keep in mind these key messages were issued about 3 hours ago, so of course this was 4 p.m. Central Time. Hurricane conditions and dangerous storm surge are likely across portions of the eastern mainland Mexico beginning late Friday, where a hurricane warning is in effect from Puerto Veracruz northward to Cabo Rojo. And then, of course, through the weekend, heavy rainfall across central and northern portions of the Yucatan Peninsula and Veracruz State should lead to flash and urban flooding. In addition, the heavy rainfall from Grace will be capable of producing mudslides in Veracruz. So definitely some significant threats for looking at that. Christian, do you have the key messages for Henri? There we go. So that is another threat that we're looking at. Henri is forecast to be near the northeast coast of the U.S. on Sunday and Monday. The risk of storm surge, wind, and rain impacts in portions of southern New England and eastern Long Island are increasing. Unfortunately, this means that watches will likely be required for portions of this area by early Friday. Swells from the Henri will begin to reach much of the east coast of the U.S. and Atlantic Canada by the end of the week and continue through the weekend. These swells should cause life-threatening surf and rip currents, and needless to say, you can see it there. I mean, it's going to be rip currents all across the Mid-Atlantic and New England Atlantic Canada coast there. And of course, the tropical storm force wind probabilities are down there, with areas all the way from the Delmarva northeastwards, and at least a 5% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds or greater. Of course, the biggest chance right now appears to be in Massachusetts, especially the Cape Cod area. And as a result of this, heavy rainfall may lead to flash urban and small stream flooding over portions of southeastern New England Sunday to Monday, and this comes just after the remnants of Fred have been currently affecting that part of area over the last few days. So, with that overview said, we're going to look at the satellite imagery as to what we are seeing right now with Grace. And Noah, you've been tracking this quite a bit. What are you seeing with Grace right now as it exits the Yucatan coast and emerges into the Bay of Campeche?
Well, Grace has been looking more intact than I thought it would be when it would be exiting the Yucatan Peninsula. So, generally, you can see there's the structure pretty much intact with this shrimp-like inflow band and then curling in towards the center. There's not very much deep convection, which is to be expected by a storm that is exiting, which has been over land for 12 hours. Um, it's expected that deep convection is gonna refire over the center, and, uh, and a quick intensification phase is possible. Yeah, that's pretty much everything I have to say about Grace at the current time.
Yeah, of course, it definitely was an interest of us all, considering how much of Grace kept himself intact. We would have thought that it was going to be looking a little bit more straggly and more disorganized, but it's still looking relatively healthy, considering what it just went through. Of course, there's going to be some time for it to get itself back together into what you would normally expect for a strengthening tropical system. But regardless, we're going to be looking at a good window for this to intensify. And what are the conditions like ahead of this thing?
They're pretty favorable. You have relatively divergent upper level flow and generally pretty weak, so you're gonna have, of course, the very high sea surface temperatures of the Gulf, which are roughly 30 degrees Celsius, and also weak and divergent upper level flow, which is um, likely to make the storm at least a formidable tropical storm to what is expected by NHC hurricane at landfall.
And yeah, we could be looking at 2 hurricane landfalls, especially the latest come from the National Hurricane Center on Henri unfolds. Definitely going to be interesting to see what goes on with that, especially considering the fact that it has been known for quite some time that a stronger track would take it more towards the west. Of course, we've got Recon going into this right now, at least Grace that is. Elliot, you've been tracking this. What is Recon finding inside of Grace right now?
Well, we do have two systems. Great. Two recon airplanes rather. We have a NOAA 2 aircraft, and we also have Air Force 302, which have both been doing some lower level reconnaissance. First, let's look at NOAA 2. They did find some 60 knot flight level winds in the northeast quadrant at the 700 millibar level, which does suggest that winds would translate to 54 knots down at the surface, and some SFMRs of slightly higher than 50 knots have also been found. So Grace has actually managed to hold up pretty well despite passing over land for about 12 hours. They're also finding some pressure drops. All I have to say about that is it's a little more intense than what the NHC was expecting as it came off, maybe. Currently, we have it at 994 millibars. There was a sonde earlier that got 995 millibars with 11 knots wind at the surface, which does translate to 994. Going up to Air Force reconnaissance, they're actually flying at 850 millibars, and they're actually finding surprisingly weaker flight level winds than what the NOAA aircraft is finding. They do suggest that the circulation is still pretty tight, and They haven't actually sampled the northeast quadrant yet, so it'll be interesting to see what they do find there once it does get there. And data from them, the Air Force plane also suggests that the pressure has dropped to 995, 994, somewhere in that range.
Very interesting there. Of course, what we were looking at, that was the update that I released 2 hours ago. The northeastern and northwestern quadrants were the ones that were remaining the most prominent with this one. Of course, as of the 5 p.m. advisory, the tropical storm force wind extent was 140 nautical miles to the northeast, 130 to the northwest, and I think it was 50 and 40 on the southern quadrants, respectively. So, much higher of a wind field on the northern quadrant right now, although that looks to be fixing itself based on what I've been seeing there with the recon flights and the National Hurricane Center intermediate advisory there. So that will be interesting to see what happens with that. Of course, regardless if you are in a hurricane warning right now or a tropical storm warning in Mexico and watching us, you definitely need to be making sure that any kind of action that you are trying to do in preparation for this hurricane, well, tropical storm, it will become hurricane, needs to be rushed to completion ASAP. You are running out of time. This is making landfall tomorrow night, whether you like it or not. So please make sure that you can are doing the necessary actions. You gotta hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. That is what we can always say with any kind of natural disaster that we kind of see. And unfortunately, we've been seeing quite a bit of issues with this hurricane season, especially across the Caribbean. Especially after Haiti, they got Fred and then a 7.2 earthquake and then Grace, so it's been one round after another for them, and now we're seeing, of course, Yucatan and Mexico take a beating here, so not good news at all.
One thing I wanted to add to the recon data is that I think it's to be expected that the 850 millibar winds are a bit lower, flight level winds are a bit lower than 700, because this thing has been passing over land, and with land you have a bit more surface friction, so you're gonna lift your boundary layer up a little bit, so we might have to use some flight level conversions that are a little bit lower than 0.9 for 700, which would suggest a little bit lower intensity in terms of 10-meter winds near the surface than we are currently seeing being proposed by Force 13, but um, around 50 to 55 knots seems to be the most reasonable intensity for Grace at the current time.
And just so that we can get through this question, because I'm sure this is going to be probably coming in with some of the questions we say, what do you think will happen with Grace as it crosses through the Mexican mountains there? Of course, there is a 70% chance from the National Hurricane Center of whatever's left of this reforming at the end of the forecast period there.
Oh, well, the mountains are probably gonna completely destroy any kind of circulation. But I've been seeing on models that the environment around these mountains and Mexico and then into the Eastern Pacific is quite moist, so there is the possibility that some kind of mid-level rotation crosses over into the Eastern Pacific and then again forms another tropical cyclone, but that's pretty far out. In general, NHC has been giving 60% chance, so that's something. I think that might be a bit overblown by models not as much destroying the circulation in Mexico. That's that's a typical trend that models like to reform things fast in the Eastern Pacific. But if it happens, I wouldn't be surprised. NHC has given a 60% chance,
They've actually upped
which
it to 70 with the latest outlook.
oh, they have upped it to 70. So yeah, 70% chance of reformation. Likely with some mid-level rotation going over into the Eastern Pacific. I don't think that any low-level low-level center or tight low-level center will cross over into the Eastern Pacific. Those mountains are too high. They're gonna disrupt the storm significantly.
And of course, with these tropical weather bulletins, at least the production side of things, in terms of what you saw in the beginning, we always use the information of what we had before, because of course this does start at the top of the hour, which means we're usually using what could potentially be outdated information relatively quickly. So we were in agreement with the National Hurricane Center in terms of what we had for the AOI there. We did have it at 60% chance, in line with the National Hurricane Center, and of course, the Atlantic didn't have an AOI the last outlook until now, and we now have a new 20% chance in the main development region that we're now looking at for. So we're probably going to be marking that eventually soon enough as well, given the fact that there has actually been model signs on that one. But regardless, we are entering the peak of Atlantic season, so it is kind of expected to see these storms, especially with what we've been seeing the last 3 storms, really. They came really close together, and while we might not see some activity based off the fact that we are going to be entering some more unfavorable conditions in a suppressed Kelvin wave, it is likely by the end of August we will be looking at activity definitely restoring once more. And of course, with this, with the general information out, we do of course devote most of our time to our viewers so that way they can ask any necessary questions. So if you want to do that, I'm sure there's going to be a lot based on what we've been seeing the last few nights. If you have any questions, please feel free to tag us at Force13. That will pop our name up in orange, and that will give us the ability to see your comments easier, and we will be able to answer said comments or questions or concerns. So we will wait for those to flow in, and we will start answering them one by one as we get through those.
So the first question I saw was Force 13, what do you make of Josh Morgerman's reading of 978.4 millibars for Grace's landfall? I think that it was definitely more intense than than a lot of us were expecting. I definitely think it could be useful for post-analysis. Like, they could definitely downgrade based on that. But yeah, that's what I have to say about it, at least. Do any of the other team members have thoughts?
Yeah, the question also asked about is the 13 millibar rise consistent with the ship's decay model? And I don't know if anyone has any appropriate answer for that, but I certainly haven't gotten a good answer for that. I don't
Yeah.
even know about the existence of the decay model. I only know about this intensification, rapid intensification index model.
And just to let you guys know, I am the one that does get the questions out to you guys. And we had a few before, so I'm trying to get that. What is Grace's moving speed right now? The last I checked, it was moving at about 15 miles an hour. Has that changed anything, or is it still 15?
I'm not sure entirely, but 15 does sound around in the ballpark of what it is going at right now. I'm not too sure about it, though.
Yeah. Alright, the next question is opinions on our new Atlantic AOI. Yes, the National Hurricane Center did, of course, issue the newest outlook about 24 minutes ago, highlighting yet another Atlantic AOI, which brings the total icons of the National Hurricane Center outlook to 4. Given the fact that we still have Henri and Grace, and the Weather Prediction Center is still issuing advisories on Fred. They're saying that a tropical wave that is located in the eastern Atlantic is producing a broad area of disorganized showers and thunderstorms. Once it interacts with another wave emerging off the African coast, environmental conditions should appear marginally favorable for some slow development by the beginning of next week, as the system moves gradually northwest. So it looks like this were to form, it would be a very slow developer and a out to sea one, thankfully, which would be against the last 4 or several systems that we've had, considering the fact we've had many land impacts so far this year, considering the fact that the only storm not to really make landfall yet was on 2 storms to make landfall was Anna and Bill. Claudette, of course, made that New Orleans side, or west of New Orleans, Lake Pontchartrain to be exact, and then of course went through the southeast a little bit. And then, of course, you had Danny, which made landfall in South Carolina. Elsa, that went through the Caribbean. Fred, that went through the Caribbean and then Florida. You had Grace, that, well, Grace is kind of obvious because we're exiting land right now. Henri, that is a land threat. So we've been looking at a lot of land threats so far this year, nonetheless. Another question that we had, this is from the Great Random channel, 413, what are the chances of Henri affecting New Jersey with tropical storm force winds? I believe someone had the outlook or chances of tropical storm force winds. Christian, can you shift that over to Henri there?
Over to, if I can find it.
There we go. Alright, so this is the latest map of wind speed probabilities, at least tropical storm force winds, that would be 40 miles an hour. And as of right now, it depends on where you are in New Jersey. If you're on the western side or southwestern side, that would be a 5 to 10% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds. If you happen to be in the green region there, at least the second shade of green, you are under a 10 to 20% chance of seeing those tropical storm force winds. And if you're in the eastern side of New Jersey, in the lime green color, that would put you in the 20 to 30% chance of tropical storm force winds. As you head into Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, as well as parts of Maine, you start seeing this yellow color, that's 30 to 40. And then once you get into the more orange color, that is a 40 to 50. And then as you get into places like Cape Cod, you can see that red. And by that point, that is literally a 70% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds. So definitely already high chance there. But you can see that as of right now, the best chance of seeing tropical storm force winds are definitely east, pretty much where the cone currently lies in, Connecticut eastward. So while parts of eastern New Jersey and really just the coastal areas shouldn't be taking their eye off their stone completely yet, New Jersey shouldn't, no, I can't say it shouldn't be, considering with some of the models taking it westward. I would suggest if you're on watch, especially in the eastern side of New Jersey, but regardless, what we're going to be seeing no matter what for that state is going to be some rip currents that definitely develop some swells as well. Going to our next question, that was from Rotato Weather, that was asking, do you think Grace will make landfall in the 960s millibar range? I don't.
That would mean.
No, I don't think it's going to get that strong. I mean, it made its
certainly
first landfall in the 980s, as far as I'm concerned.
Josh Morganman has found 978 at the first landfall, but I mean, it's certainly possible that if we see very rapid development, that it deepens all the way into the 960s. But generally, it looks more like, especially with some dry air north of the center, which I forgot to mention, we have pretty dry mid-level air north of the center of Grace, which might limit some intensification, as it has done in the Western Caribbean. I'd say a more gradual intensification phase is more likely than very rapid development.
So, and another question that pretty much follows along the same side of intensity is, do you think Grace will become a Cat 2 before landfall?
Oh,
I mean,
that's certainly very possible.
It is possible. I mean, what did we have it forecast as last time?
I think we've been trying to remain conservative and pretty much go with the National Hurricane Center and go with 90 with the implication that it could strengthen further and go up to Category 2.
So everything up to 100 miles per hour is very likely to occur.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't see this gunning for major hurricane status at the moment, but I do think Category 2 winds are very possible by the time it does make landfall. It does have just over 1 day left over land. Over water, rather, sorry. So if it does manage to get an inner core rebuilt by in the next couple hours, I do think that it does have a decent shot at Category 2.
Of course, that's going to be something that we're going to be monitoring as we continue. Of course, in terms of what we have planned in terms of live coverage, I'm pretty sure there should be more tomorrow morning, and then of course I will be taking the helm for landfall coverage tomorrow night. It seems that it's going to be relatively late in the night where it occurs, similar to what we were dealing with. Of course, we were live earlier this morning at a very unusual time for us to be live, and it seems that's going to be holding on given the fact that landfall is to be expected around 12 a.m. Central Time, 1 a.m. Eastern Time. So I will likely be helming that one, and of course we'll be watching that as it makes its landfall. Henri, of course, live coverage will continue, so I don't think we're going to be taking a break from live coverage anytime soon with any of the Atlantic storms that we're seeing right now. The next question that we had was, is Hurricane Grace going to cause damage in Mexico City?
I think Grace is probably going to be a bit too far north for Mexico City, and if anything, it would likely cause some moderate light rainfall, probably. But I wouldn't be too worried if you're in Mexico City. But I do have one thing to mention really quick. A new dropsonde has just came in from the NOAA plane, and it seems that the pressure has decreased to 993 millibars based on this.
I should note Mexico City is actually not too far from the center of the cone there, so they're well inside it, although at that point it will likely only have 40 to 45 miles an hour wind. So I would expect some rainfall, heavy rainfall, some gusty winds up to tropical storm force, but compared to the areas east of Mexico City, this won't really be much compared to what the O's would be seeing. As of right now, we do have this as a CDPS Stage 5. The most significant thing that is benefiting this parameter of 5 would be the significant rainfall that we're going to be seeing. Some areas could be seeing up to 18 inches of rain with this, so definitely not something to be taken down lightly in the slightest. Henri, I believe, is currently a Stage 3, if I'm not mistaken. We had another question, and I believe that was already answered by Nelson, who is manning the account right now. So that was the New York Metro, and what was the chances of that causing flooding. They weren't wrong, of course. That is all dependent on the track that this takes. Obviously, if it's stronger, then it's going to be taking more of a track westward. While some models have been indicating such, it looks like the more probable area of landfall appears to be Massachusetts, and that is even if it makes landfall. That's not even a certainty yet. So that is, of course, something I'm going to be watching. But regardless, anywhere that gets the center of it, it's definitely going to be a significant amount of rainfall nonetheless, especially if it does take that slow move there. So I would not be surprised to see at least 4 to 8 inches of rain for a good portion of New England there. But I don't think it's going to be heavily centered towards New York at the moment. So as I'm trying to look at the more questions that we have. The GFS model has been indicating a possible tropical storm making landfall across the U.S.-Mexico border over the past few days. If you're talking about the the model run that's past an hour, 180 hours out, because I've been noticing that too, that is way too early to say at the moment. Way too early. We had another question from the fun stuff. Will Henri be a Cat 1 at landfall? As we mentioned earlier with the Cat 2 question, it's all in the cards. It could be a high-end Category 1, or it could be a low-end Category 2. It seems like the most probable scenario at this time. An interesting question, Leon Nguyen, sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly, but they ask, will Grace get a pinhole eye and rapidly intensify before making landfall in Mexico?
Unlikely.
Yeah, the core would have to tighten significantly. Sorry.
Yeah, first it has to at least fire deep convection and build itself a more robust inner core to that we can answer this question.
Another question that we had was chances of Henri giving Western Europe and Azore. another epsilon swell when it kicks out into the Atlantic as an extratropical system?
Way too far out to answer that.
Yeah, keep in mind, 5 days from now, we still have a really wide cone of uncertainty as to where that will be, and by that point, it will likely just be post-tropical, not too long by then. And for that to happen, it's probably not going to be until at least day 9 or 10. And if we're already having a lot of uncertainties as to what's going to happen by day 5, you can only imagine what that's going to look like by the time you get to day 10. And just another reminder, as we have gone through asking or answering questions for the last 15 minutes. If you have any questions, please be sure to tag us at Force13. We will try to answer them, and I'm pretty sure the main account is also trying to go in and help answer some of those questions if we are unable to. So just keep up with the questions. We will be answering them as we continue through the night. We had another one. That's probably an aggressive question. Could Grace reform into a major hurricane in the Eastern Pacific?
Well,
Again, way
it's,
too
it's
far
way
out.
way too early to tell, really. I mean, there is an area of interest in the Eastern Pacific, as you saw at the beginning of this live stream, which Grace is expected to reform there, but we don't know how strong it's going to be. It's way too early to tell.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Next question that we had, that was, what are the tropical storm force wind probabilities for the Salem and Gloucester, I'm bad at pronunciation, the New England cities, Gloucester cities?
Let's take a look here. If you need to look at the tropical storm force wind probabilities, it's on my screen right now.
Here's another look at the tropical storm force wind probability. So if you're trying to look for if your area's in there, this would probably be your best bet. Of course, the darkest green shows the lowest chances of sustained tropical storm force winds. However, they are 5. And then of course, the closer you get to that pink color there, the higher those chances are. So obviously, if you're in the orange and red, especially the yellow, pretty much anywhere in the yellow and orange further, definitely need to be watching this system closely and watching the trends, especially if you are in the path to this Atlantic Canada. Even though you're only in the 20 to 30 right now, I would still suggest watching this very much closely as we head into the next few days, because obviously this will be coming towards you as well, regardless of what happens, it seems. So that is something that we are watching with that as well. The next question that we had was, do you see the season being a 2017 type season?
No.
Well, I guess that was just the answer. Crazy Zach YouTube asked, does Henri have a chance of a hurricane landfall over 74? I don't know whether you mean knots or miles an hour in Newfoundland, but both questions are just a no. Texas Gaming asks, is it possible that Henri doesn't make the turn and goes towards Florida? No, that's impossible.
No. That's impossible, yeah.
Let's see here. A Hurricane Goddess asks, since I'm evacuating my campground in Massachusetts, and I'm going to be around the Worcester area, how bad will it be there? If that's still in Massachusetts, the entire area of Massachusetts, especially the further east you're going to be going, the more chance of seeing this tropical storm force winds. And if we were looking at a possible hurricane landfall, that's definitely not a good sign, considering the fact that we are not used to seeing these types of landfalls in this type of region there. So, and just the entire storm track itself is just something we haven't seen. A storm that had formed northeast of Bermuda has never made landfall in the U.S. before, based on literally all modern records that we have. So, oh, it's pronounced Worcester. I'm really bad at New England city pronunciation. I'm very much sorry. Could Henri affect Greenland, just like what we asked with the last question? Uncertain. Could Henri make a turn to the west once it is inland? Well, that's not even guaranteed that it goes inland. Although there is supposed to be some kind of Um, it's kind of reminiscent of what some storms have done in this area, where it's supposed to go towards the north, and then it's supposed to either make a very slight turn towards the west briefly, and then go off towards the east. It's kind of uncertain right now with that one. Probably someone else has a better question with that. When is the next recon mission for Henri?
Last I checked, it's probably sometime around 12Z tomorrow. I can double check on that right now, and I'll get back on that.
Alright. While we wait for that, the next question that we had with that was, how much rain will Henri give to Boston on your estimates? That's still a little bit of a challenging ways to go with that one. I know Boston's in eastern Massachusetts at the very least, and that is not too far off of where we are expecting some of the biggest impacts to be going into, so I wouldn't be surprised if you get at least 3 inches of rain. I wouldn't even argue going past 5 inches of rain, especially with where this goes. Obviously, if it tracks towards much more west, then we could be looking at a more serious situation. And let me fix the stream there. Alright, there we go.
While you're fixing that, I do have the answer to the recon question. The next low-level reconnaissance flight for Henri is going to be 12Z, which is about 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that's going to be NOAA 43. And we also have another Teal-72 Air Force recon plane in there around that same time as well. And we're going to have some early morning upper-level flights as well to gather data for around the storm so that they can input that into the models.
Another question that we had, which is, I think, too early to say right now. Jason Michael asked, do you think 2022 will be above average? I'm assuming this is for the Atlantic.
Way too early to tell. I mean, it's so way too early to tell. We couldn't tell if 2022 is going to be a super El Nino or just neutral or La Nina. It's totally impossible to make a seasonal prediction at this time of the year.
Needless to say, we need to get through this season before we really talk about what we're probably going to be seeing next season, because of course we've been watching the forecast change quite a few times with this hurricane season so far, so it's definitely way too early to say what's going to be in 2022. SR asked another interesting question that is just going to be an answer of no. Is this a Hurricane Sandy type situation? The answer, no. While Henri is expected to expand in size, this is not going to be reaching Sandy levels. Sandy was a much more complex situation.
Yeah, I think one thing we might can do is if Elliot, you have tropical tidbits open, we might do go to the HWF parent and just show the 200 millibar level wind and just go over that. That's has been pretty useful to analyze some of the steering patterns that are associated with Henri.
I can do that.
Yeah, if you go to the initialization, which is about now, you can see uh a big upper level ridge, which is about over the Gulf of Mexico and the axis over the Florida Panhandle and near the Carolinas. And there's this belt of northeasterly flow impacting Henri with shear. And if you go forward in time about 24 hours ago, forward, you can see it moves under the ridge axis and establishes dual outflow with this shortwave trough, which is roughly over Virginia. That is why it accelerates towards the north, and this upper level low then establishes a negative tilt, and there's some southeasterly steering influence which tries to steer Henri a bit more towards the coast, which is roughly this time. And by this time, this upper level low weakens, and it drives Henri into this ridge, and that's why it slows down and goes inland and practically stalls in this particular model run. And the thing is, if you look at the ensembles of the all the tracks of the ensembles, you see that the strongest members are more towards the coast, and that's because the lower level flow is more out of the southwest and tries to steer it towards the open Atlantic, and the upper levels have this clear southeasterly steering influence, which would um, slingshot Henri in towards the coast. So it's pretty sensitive to Henri's intensity, how the track forecast would be going on, um, how the track forecast materializes. So far, I would say with the current intensity trends we have been seeing with Henri and its convective activity, I'd say uh, the the output that it might go further towards the coast, further towards the west, is more likely than the other scenario.
Let's see here, getting to our next question, because we've got quite a few that came in while we were answering that one. Is it possible for Grace to make a TS land? Well, very possible, to be honest, considering the fact there's actually a chance it makes landfall as a hurricane near Nantucket at the current track. The current track takes it just offshore of Nantucket, so any further shifts west, and we would be talking a landfall there. What are your thoughts of the North Atlantic for this coming September?
Honestly, kind of a favorable setup, and that's not what we like to see. There should be some favorable velocity anomalies that should be setting themselves up over Africa, producing some pretty robust waves, I'd say. That's at least what I've been seeing. I haven't checked on velocities very closely recently, but that's just a trend I was noticing earlier.
Yeah, we expect a pretty robust looking Kelvin wave to pass from the East Peg over into the Atlantic by the beginning of September, which is likely to where we are likely to have another spike in activity.
We'll be watching for that, of course. September is, of course, the time where we see the peak season here. What impact should Philadelphia, New York, Providence, and Boston receive from Henri? And what will the tide be around that time? Well, that is a lot of cities that you asked there, and a lot of specifics there. Philadelphia, probably not going to be seeing much, if at all. New York City, watch this one very much closely. You could be seeing something, especially if it takes a more western route into Long Island there. Boston, you definitely, of all of those cities, you need to be watching that the most. Providence, Rhode Island, same thing. Providence and Boston have the highest chance of seeing that the tropical storm force conditions out of the cities they listed there, and impacts in general. Thankfully, this isn't going to be a Sandy type situation where we had a complete moon there. It's going to be a gibbous at best. I'm not exactly the most knowledgeable about astrology there, but astronomy, I should say. Not astrology. Dear goodness. But regardless, it's probably not going to be anything that we saw 9 years ago, of course. Is a La Nina or El Nino more common in the Atlantic? Neither, as the Atlantic is not exactly the place you would typically talk about this. It's the East Pacific that you see those La Nina and El Nino conditions. And I'm pretty sure that it's more it's something that alternates, and it's not exactly something that's more common or another.
I can answer that. So, El Niños are more common to be single events. So, short El Nino and then back to neutral or La Nina, and they're typically more short El Niños than La Niñas. So you'd have more El Niños than La Niñas, but the El Niños are shorter in length. That's because a El Nino is practically the opposite of the base state of the basin, and a La Nina is just an extension of the base state where you have strong easterly winds, and you can have La Nina phases that go several years. For example, 1998 to 2001, all years had La Ninas. And El Ninos are much shorter in length, and therefore there are more of them.
Another question that we had: has there ever been a season anywhere on Earth without a single storm? Technically, 2020 Central Pacific season? I guess that counts?
If you count the Central
Technically-
Pacific, there have been a lot of seasons without a storm. But on the other basins, I actually don't know. I don't think so.
Unless you're talking about, like, wait, has there ever been a season? Yeah, that's pretty much any... There's pretty much been storms every year. It's, of course, 1914 is known in the Atlantic for its one storm on record. But to be fair, it's kind of hard, especially as you go back later into more of those unreliable records before the satellite era, because then you don't really know what exactly happened with that. Can Grace fool everyone and just dissipate a lot and only... Okay, I'm trying to figure out what you mean by this. Can Grace fool everyone and just dissipate a lot and only make landfall as a 40 to 50 mile an hour storm?
Why not? Pretty unlikely. It's very likely to intensify, but I mean, crazier things have happened before. But the technical answer is no.
Anyways, kind of skipped a few questions by accident. Will this be more of an Irene situation? Irene kind of... the problem with comparing this to other storms is the fact that literally every single other storm that's been talked to or asked about here came from a completely different area. Most of the storms you see that affect here either form in the Caribbean, the Western Atlantic, or just pretty much somewhere around that area, or just something that's coming from the Gulf of Mexico and just racing upwards. We have never seen a storm that formed northeast of Bermuda and made this type of track before, so this is definitely a first-time event in terms of what we are seeing with this track here. That is really what I can say. So, to be fair, you can't really compare Henri with anything.
If you want a better analogy, it would be, I think, Jose 2017, but a bit further towards the west, where it actually is a bigger threat to the eastern seaboard. But Jose also had a pretty similar environment in terms of steering influence.
Yep. Let's see here. Can Henri pull a 2020 Epsilon and become a major hurricane in cold waters?
Well, the waters that are above the Gulf Stream line are 23, 20s, 22, 23 degrees Celsius. And Epsilon became a major hurricane in 27 degrees Celsius, so that's a completely different league of cold water. So that's really not a fair comparison.
Another question that we had, of course, we are going to be wrapping up in questions for the next 5 minutes, so please, if you have any questions, you got about 5 minutes before we do wrap up.
I do just want to point out, we have had a new video update released just now.
And this was Henri, or?
I believe it was Henri, yes. Let me just double check. Yes, Henri.
Okay, cool. Anyways, what is the last tropical storm to strike Massachusetts?
If I recall correctly, it might have been Hannah in 08. Don't quote me on that. If not, it would probably be Herman 04.
Yeah, seems about right. On Sunday, would it be a bad time to travel near the shorelines of Maine? Probably so, considering the fact that Maine is in the impact zone. While you're not going to be seeing it as bad as the New England coast, like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, those areas, there's still going to be some really rough surf that's going to be going on there. So, if that is a plan,
Yeah.
if what you're planning, I would not suggest for that.
Rip currents are a pretty big killer in a lot of these storms that ride up the East Coast because a lot of people don't expect them. Just because you're not close to a storm doesn't mean you're not going to see some dangerous surf and potentially get caught off guard and swept out to sea.
Yeah.
So just be really careful. I'd advise stay away from beaches this weekend.
Yep, definitely. Next question that we had. And that would be, can Grace head towards Texas? No. I'm not even going to finish that question because Grace is not heading towards Texas. So we're just going to end that there. Phil the Man asked, what is the likelihood of Grace becoming a Category 3? I believe we answered this earlier, but the chances don't seem that high right now. Not at all, especially with the fact this only has about 28 hours until it makes landfall.
We anticipate, at most, a low-end Category 2.
Yeah. How would a La Nina affect California in terms of rainfall and temperature?
La Nina years in California are usually like dry and hot, and El Nino is the opposite.
And not good news there with all the wildfires that's been going on there. Lakota the Bear asks, is it possible for Tropical Storm Linda to become an ex-tropical storm and hit Hawaii? Well, it is expected to be a post-tropical depression when it reaches Hawaii. It will no longer have gales by the time it does reach there, especially with how quickly Linda's been deteriorating over the last few hours especially. I'm trying to figure out what the feedback issues are coming from. Someone has feedback on you guys' end. That was coming from Christian. Christian, you've got feedback issues on your end.
Okay, well, I'm trying to fix it, but I've got a spinny Discord logo right now, and it's not going away.
Alright, we'll try to make do then. Bear with us. What do you think the path of the new disturbance will be in the Atlantic? Well, the National Hurricane Center Outlook map kind of goes straight forward with that, considering the fact it is going to be going northwest. It's going to be the first out-to-sea storm, hopefully, in a while here. In terms of... Yeah. The ensembles, in terms of Henri, let me look at them real quick. Those actually aren't more concerning. They've actually shifted a little bit towards the east on them, so I don't know what you're seeing. But they've actually shifted eastwards a little bit, so I'm not too sure what you're seeing with that one. Any thoughts on Grace's status and convection at the moment? This will be our last question before we do go off the air.
Well, something that did come up with Recon is the Air Force plane is observing a 73 knot flight level wind, which does suggest that it is indeed restrengthening some. So just wanted to bring that up really quick. I do think it does have some potential for rapid intensification. I would definitely say the next few hours are going to be crucial, and personally I do believe that this is going to be a high-end Cat 1 at landfall.
Well, thanks to our team, and of course wrapping it up with the TWB before we go to the On This Day here. We'll be closing it out on the cone, of course. We have with us Amethyst, Christian, Elliot, Sam, Isaac, and of course Noah with us at the end of this. And of course it is now time for the daily On This Day scene. So let me get that pulled up. Give me a second. Well, that did not go as planned. Give me a second as I fix that. I don't like hit film or OBS sometimes. It just randomly resized the On This Day to a completely weird dimension that was massive on every level. So we're gonna fix that real quick. There we go, that looks better. Anyways, on this day in 1994, we had 3 systems active. We had Typhoon Fred, which was coming off its peak. Its peak image was shown on there, but that was not what it looked like on this day, though. We also had Hurricane Chris in the Atlantic. That would be an out-to-sea storm. And, of course, everyone's favorite Eastern Pacific storm, Hurricane John, the longest-lived storm on record. It was in the middle of its journey across the Eastern Pacific, soon enough to cross into the Central Pacific, where it would live yet another few weeks. So, of course, a very active day in terms of hurricane-strength storms, considering there were 3 on this day, every single one on this day. Of course, you can find them powered by Cyclone History. So, with that, the next name in the Atlantic is Ida, followed by Julian. In the Eastern Pacific, the next two names there are Marty followed by Nora. And in the Central Pacific, you know how it feels to chew 5 gum, but we really wanted to chew 5 gum if we get Hone. That would be the feeling that we would get. So let's hope we get Hone soon. In the Western Pacific, it's Omaze followed by Kansan, and then in the North Indian Ocean, we're looking out for Gulab and Shaheen. Ah, we love the chew 5 gun meme from Force 13 Extra, don't we? Moving on over to the Southern Hemisphere, the next name is Patty followed by Ruby. In the Southwestern Indian Ocean, it's Anna followed by Batsire. In the South Pacific, it's Cody. We'll be back for another live Truck Weather Bulletin tomorrow night, as well as more live coverage anticipated, especially as we get closer to Grace's landfall.